I went to the head rabbi, who was an older gentleman. He was studying in his office with books stacked up on his chairs because he really didn't want anybody to visit. And he was at his desk and he was doing his work. And I knocked on the door and he looked up like this. And I said, Rabbi, why don't we believe in Jesus? And his response was this, Jeff: because we don't.
Hey friends, Jeff Morgan here with Jews for Jesus. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm a clumsy guy. I bump into things, I cut myself, I fall, and I simply hurt and embarrass myself on a regular basis. I do. My wife just shakes her head and laughs at me. I see my 3-year-old falling all the time, and he seems fine. He just gets right up and keeps on going with a smile on his face. Now, you've heard the expression, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. Well, some say this phrase comes from the biblical story of David and Goliath, and was made popular by the world-famous boxer from the mid-1800s, Bob Fitzsimmons, who's known as one of the hardest punchers in boxing history. But it makes sense. The larger people are, the harder they fall. But this also works metaphorically. The more powerful and successful people are, the more they tend to suffer when they experience defeat and disaster. Our guest today, Marc Stein, is a Jewish believer in Jesus and what some would call the classic entrepreneur. He owned many businesses and knew how to identify and fill unmet needs in the marketplace, eventually earning him the family title of the rich uncle. By the world's standards, he was doing quite well until a series of events happened that changed his life. Marc Stein, thank you so much for being here. I'm so happy to see you, and I really appreciate you taking your time to be here on the channel.
That's great to be here, Jeff. Thanks so much for the invitation.
Oh, you're welcome. I can't wait to hear your story, as I'm sure the viewers can either. How does a guy that grew up in a culturally Jewish home, who became every parent's dream of the successful Jewish son, put his faith in Jesus as Messiah and Savior of the world?
Well, the story didn't exactly go like that, but let me share it with you. I grew up in a very, very reformed and culturally Jewish home. We would, visit our grandparents every Sunday. We would go to Sunday school. We'd go to synagogue, which was like I said, very reformed, pretty light. It was Jewish light, and but it was really the center point of our life growing up. And so, as a young boy, I grew up with very few Gentile friends. I grew up really in a bubble, a Jewish bubble, and it would be a lot of family and a lot of people connected to temple. Mm-hmm. And ended up going to Sunday school as a youngster, and then Hebrew school, and was bar mitzvahed. And life was, pretty normal. At least I thought it was. I had parents that were married, and I had an older sister, and we lived in a suburb of Los Angeles in the San Fernando Valley, which is like a Jewish Mecca. I mean, there were so many Jewish people there, and really just went through life at that point as a child, just loving God, not really having a formal connection, but feeling that He was with me. And then, as it turned out, I was going through, after bar mitzvah, I was going through the confirmation process, which is really how you graduate from childhood into adulthood within the temple. And my rabbi, actually it was the associate rabbi, asked me to just teach the young children the difference between Christianity and being Jewish. Mm-hmm. And so they could just relate better to their Christian friends. And for me, it was like, well, okay, I've never really thought about that before. So I went home and opened up the Encyclopedia Britannica and just tried to get a handle on the difference between Christianity and Judaism. Didn't really work for me. And back in the day, we would climb on our bikes and ride to the library. And that's what I did. And read the Gospels for the first time.
Now, did your rabbi tell you to read the New Testament, or did he kind of just point you in that direction and let you go?
Yeah, good question. He did not. As a matter of fact, I think if he knew what I was going to do, he wouldn't have told me. He would have selected somebody else. But as it turned out, I was just amazed how Jewish the books were. And I came back, and I didn't come back to my associate rabbi. I went to the head rabbi, who was an older gentleman, and he was studying in his office with books stacked up on his chairs because he really didn't want anybody to visit. I mean, it was just filled with books. And he was at his desk and he was doing his work. And I knocked on the door and he looked up like this. And I said a number of things, but the only thing I remember blurting out is, "Rabbi, why don't we believe in Jesus?" And his response was this, Jeff: "Because we don't."
Back to the book.
That was it. He was right back in it. And there I was feeling like I was a little confused. And at the same time, I never knew a Jewish person that had accepted Jesus. And so I had nowhere to go with it. So it literally kind of just took a sideline because I was very interested in sports and I was coming of age with the girls were very interesting to me. And starting to look at college and everything else. And I really just drifted away from that experience. And I really had a rough time too doing that presentation to the children, because it was like, I'm having a rough time delineating, other than Christians believe in Jesus. I really had a rough time saying this is what the differences are.
So just to interject, you're a Jewish kid and you saw the Jewishness of the New Testament, which is what caused you to ask the rabbi why we don't believe in Jesus. I think that's fascinating, because the people that haven't read the New Testament are usually the most critical of Christianity, especially Jews putting their faith in Jesus.
Well, yes, and the holidays and the way that they would the tradition that we all still hold, and the Passover, it was so familiar.
Yeah.
That it was kind of like, and at the same time, not everything was really complimentary. I mean, I thought, this is real. This is a real, it's like just a real story. This isn't fiction. It didn't feel to me. It felt real. So anyway, Jeff, what ended up happening I really saw that in my family, really the place of influence, the most important person in the family was my rich uncle. And I thought, that's what I want to be. I want to become the rich uncle. And so I set my sights on, and I had a flair for business. I was, from the time I was a young person, I would do very entrepreneurial things, always starting businesses and, doing little carnivals around my block and having people pay me to come in. And so I had a couple of years of college, and I was a young man in a hurry, and I jumped off originally into the entertainment business, which I realized wasn't for me, but I was able to very shortly thereafter receive a mentorship from a very influential marketer who became my mentor. He happened to be the meanest man I ever met in my life, but he was amazing in really teaching me about business. He taught me about things like arbitrage before I even knew what it was. I mean, we would, and sales and why you want to be open certain days. And so he was a retailer, and I really found a home in business. And from that point, moving forward, my life was pretty normal in the sense that I got married, ended up having a few children, was involved in different businesses, and I left him. He wanted, this is just staggering. He said he was way ahead of himself as far as visionary. And this is back about the time when Beta and VHS players came out.
Yeah.
And he said, Mark, I want you to go into a business with me. It's called cellular phones. Every person on the planet is going to be carrying a phone in their pocket. And I said, not interested. I want to open up video stores. So I ended up opening a few video stores in the Valley, and it ended up going into other things. And
video stores worked, though. I mean, they did. They were around for a while, and I went to them.
And it was, it's usually not so much the idea; it's the market timing. Is the timing good, and can you ride that wave? And I was working on becoming, the rich uncle. I was working towards business. I was very fortunate in business, and then ultimately ended up in a professional service business that went from like 0 to 130 million in a few years.
Wow.
We ended up selling it into the public markets. I became a very young corporate executive, and I truly, that pile of money that I wished for, that treasure that I wished for, materialized. And in one day, I went from just a regular life to I don't think I'll ever have to work again. And I was never so miserable in that life.
Really?
I had nothing. That's what I was working for. And the realization of that goal left me so empty, and realizing my partners and I just sold the business. So it's like selling your children. I mean, it just left me so empty. But I ended up, within a relatively short period of time, resigned, taking an early resignation from that role, and came home for what I thought was going to be like a 6-month sabbatical. And while I was in such a hurry to be a successful businessman, I lost touch with my wife, and I had bought her things, and those things became more important to her than my relationship with her, and ultimately ended up in a very bad separation and divorce, and became a single father. But prior to that, when I came home and started working out of the house, I realized that I can't work out of the house. I have to take an office somewhere else. And I ended up, after a short time, buying a business. It was a multimedia learning company. It was just a distraction to get out of the house. And it was a small marketing company. That's my background. I'm an MBA, but really just a marketer at heart, and ended up buying this business. And within a short time, it was a publishing company, but 400 of the 600 titles I bought ended up being encumbered. And I had to go to court. At first time I was in litigation, I was going through a divorce, and I was hemorrhaging cash. And all the things that I thought money would buy me, I was just miserable. And I would go around asking my friends, where do you find your peace?
Really?
And, they'd tell me the garden, yoga, running.
Right.
But I had an executive vice president who would make appointments for me, and she would do a number of things. And she was the one who really saw my pain. And she said, I made an appointment for you. I said, okay. She always did. And I said, okay, well, it doesn't matter. So on that day, we ended up going to the park. And I was like, why are we at a park? And she reached into her bag and pulled out a Bible and took me to Isaiah 53, which I was familiar with. But Jeff, I was so distraught by the life that I had created. It's like building a successful career in which you've climbed this ladder. And what I found was I was high up the ladder, but I was on against the wrong wall. I had built it all on my own vision and my own plan, and God had no place in it. And it was just, I was miserable. And between everything that was going on, the timing was perfect. I had a flashback to when I was a kid.
When you read the New Testament.
Yeah. And so when I encountered the King, my world flipped. It absolutely flipped upside down. And I was still going through the divorce. I was still going through the litigation, but the peace that I was now carrying was so different. But I had a real rough time with grace. It took me 2 years to really understand the grace message. But what was in front of me, I really didn't realize, being a Jewish man that accepts Yeshua. I didn't know anyone really that had, and I knew of, certain Jews that had, but didn't have personal relationship with him. And so when I went home to my folks and I told them about me accepting Jesus, Yeshua, as Messiah, and my mother's response was, "Why couldn't you have a midlife crisis like most Jewish men?" I don't know. I already had the convertible, so I think she was talking about something else. So anyways, really had the next 10 years were very difficult and with my family, but ended up really maneuvering, being a single dad well. And I did lose a lot of the money in the divorce and in the business that I bought that ended up I had to close. So, I got to start over, but this time I was a single dad with a good focus. My focus was on him. My business, I had to open up a consulting firm so I could be at home when my kids were at home, and I could be working when they weren't. And during that time, I really learned to follow Yeshua as the center of my world. And shortly, it wasn't shortly, about 6-7 years later, I ended up remarrying a very beautiful Christian girl, and she was actually the girl who brought Isaiah 53 to me.
No way.
7 years earlier.
How did she bring that? How did she know to open that up to? Because she knew that it was a passage in the Hebrew scriptures that pointed.
Well, she was a better Jew than I was growing up. She grew up in the Worldwide Church of God, which is a cult, but they were Sabbath worshipers and really understood the Old Testament.
Okay. And she was Jewish too, or?
No, she was
in observance. Okay.
Yeah. So it was almost like being a Seventh-day Adventist, but she had a much better understanding of the laws and the regulations and so we got along. She understood me really well. She understood my lack. During those 7 years, though, we stayed friends, but it wasn't until like 6 years later that we really started dating, and then ended up marrying. So when married, at that time, Jeff, I was unwinding all of my business activities, or most of them, as far as my active engagement, and I really felt that the Lord was calling me to full-time Christian service. So I didn't know how that was going to happen, because here's a recently divorced Jewish guy that came to faith, but yet here I am. So,
right. Wow, that's an incredible story, because it leaves people asking questions. When people told me that there were people from both sides, go for your dreams, you can achieve anything you want, it'll lead to your ultimate happiness, you can do it with your own power. And then there were the other ones saying, going for what you want to go for, by the time you get there, you're not going to be happy. Just look at so-and-so and so-and-so. And I thought, wow, at least I want to at least feel it for myself to know. And I'm just so grateful, Marc, that I was spared because I wanted to go into the entertainment business as an entertainer. And I didn't realize how dark that world was. Especially on the other side of salvation, when I wasn't a believer, I never realized. And so when I became a believer, I started to listen to the secular music differently and hear it differently. And I could no longer listen to the music that I was regularly listening to. My favorite artists, I couldn't listen to them anymore because they were singing about things that were so dark.
That's right.
And it sounded so normal. So I'm just glad that I was spared that, and I don't have any regrets of not making it. But you have talents and skills now that are being used for God's glory, which is great. And we're going to get into some more of that in our subsequent episodes. So thank you so much, Marc, for sharing your testimony with us all.
It was my pleasure. Thanks, Jeff.
In our next episode with Marc Stein, we'll be talking about the New Testament and why Jews should be reading it. If you'd like to contact us at Jews for Jesus, reach out to us on our website at jewsforjesus.org, where you can also sign up for our newsletter, which will inform you of what is going on with Jews for Jesus worldwide. You can also chat with us anonymously on our website and even follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. And may you all find peace, hope, and eternal life in our Messiah, Yeshua.